Jeff. I originally created, or I'll talk some more about, but I created this presentation for test pilot school way back in like 2009. And you will see through here, I'll refer to TPS, that's test pilot school, or TPS gliders. That was the way I was referring to what we would call the modern sailplanes, the stuff that's on the line over here, because that's what I was familiar with, and of course, all of you are too. So I'm a retired major from the Air Force, retired back in 2003. I did go through the test pilot school as a flight test engineer back in 1989. I also taught in the Aero department at the Air Force Academy from 93 to 96. And I've been at the test pilot school as either military or civilian in some fashion ever since 1997. And Gary Aldrich helped get me checked out in gliders, and when he left, I became the TPS Chief Soaring Pilot there. Some of you may have seen my airplane. This is a four-place Bearhawk that occasionally makes its way up here. It was built, or I scratch-built it, had the first flight in 2008, the first real flight in 2009. This is landing at Oshkosh. 4 seats. The engine is essentially the same engine we have in the tow planes out here, except I spin it faster. So it goes up to 260 horsepower, and it's currently got about 920 hours on it. So you might wonder, how does a young guy like me, okay, sort of young, you know, born in 61, so how do I know anything about what a CG-4A was like? Well, I like to call this forensic flight test. Basically, I look through all the material that's available and try to get something out of it. Back in 2009, my dad was visiting the CG-4A that's now in Lubbock, when it was in Terrell, Texas, because it was closer to him. And he came across several of these documents, which he gave to me, which started this. And then the book that Jeff referred to was many, many years later, just recently, I thought, you know, I got this whole briefing, but I'm forgetting what I said. So I should write all that down. Well, I did, and it's almost 100 pages long. Some of those are pictures. One of the magic things that I found was in this book, the Pilot's Flight Operating Instructions, was this chart, which looks fairly innocuous, but it's a power required chart for the CG-4A. And that was sufficient information to pull out a drag puller, you know, L over D curves, and all that other stuff that you'll see coming up here later. Also, as a flight tester, I would read what was in the pilot manuals very carefully and try to worm out what are they actually saying there. And comparing that with experiences that I had. Of course, being an engineer, engineers like to make assumptions. We don't know something, we assume. Take our best guess that we can. Also, we have available to us various approximations, equations for like flying qualities and so forth that I can apply to this as well. And then, of course, we're comparing it to known aircraft. And finally, way down here, there are a bunch of videos on YouTube. Okay, that goes without saying, but there's a bunch about the CG-4A. In fact, one very interesting one that I'm going to mention when it comes up later and tell you how you can find it. Watch it too. Okay, so what are we going to look at? We're going to look at background info on the CG-4A. What was it? Why was it? Etc. We're going to give a description of what it could do and so forth. And you will note nowhere up here is operational history. I'm not going to tell you about how it was used in the invasions or any of that other stuff. This is a pilot talk. This is for pilots and for you to imagine what would it have been like to get a chance to fly this. We're going to talk about towing, which it did a lot of, glide performance, flying qualities, crashing, landing, and then finally, well, where'd they all go? Why are there no military gliders or military glider pilots anymore? Okay, so the mission was twofold. One, airborne assault. Get stuff into a contested area for the troops or equipment for the troops, and you're landing in fields that are too small to get your cargo airplanes into. Too small to put, say, a C-47 into. Large cargo parachutes, we haven't invented that yet. Remember, parachutes were made either of silk, which is rather expensive and hard to produce, or nylon, which was a brand new concept in World War II, and it was in short supply. And we'll talk about where what we had did go. Finally, there was this myth of reusability. This idea that you're going to go into a contested area, find an open field that the enemy kindly left available to you. You're going to land in there, unload your stuff with no damage to the glider, no problems, and then, oh, we'll come back later, pick it up, bring it back, and reuse it. By that word myth, you can probably guess that that didn't work out so well. The other big thing that they seem to be used for was, I call it a cargo trailer. You know, think about many years ago when all of us were much younger, you had a car, you know, like maybe a sedan or something, and you needed more space to carry stuff for some reason. So what'd you do? You go down to U-Haul and you rent a trailer and you put it behind your car and you stuff the stuff in, because, you know, why should I have, you know, a big pickup truck, which at that time was not very comfortable, or something. The analogy is we had cargo airplanes, but a big cargo airplane, that's a C-47, which there's, compared to what we use now, not a whole lot of room in there, and it's not easy to load and so forth. But we had, you know, a bunch of bombers and high-powered fighters and other stuff that we could drag a trailer around to carry stuff. Well, and this wasn't our idea to begin with. Germany had some early successes with gliders. The assault on the Belgian fortress Ebenemal, they had it all fortified around it, but they left the roof off. And they flew in some gliders, landed inside the fort. Those guys, you know, got out like the Trojan horse, took it over and let the rest of the guys in, and so forth. That worked pretty well. Then Germany in 1941, realize this before Pearl Harbor, 1941, Germany decides, we've got all these parachutes and gliders, we're going to invade Crete and do it in this new airborne invasion. They did it. They were successful, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. There was so many losses in that Hitler decided, you know, that's way too costly a way to fight a war. We're not going to do that anymore. And all the paratroopers just became, you know, infantry. However, the other side, the Allies, looked at that and go, look at what they're doing. We got to get us some of those. So suddenly, there was a new idea. We're going to get gliders. Okay, well, what do we have to go with? And in one of these CG-4A documents, it all actually calls out that in 1942, right after Pearl Harbor, in the United States, there was a grand total of 160 licensed glider pilots. Most of them are right here. Of that, only 25 of them were qualified as instructors. So crap, how are we going to learn this? Well, that's what they started with. And Ron and Jeff will tell you that their TG2s were once in the military.
And we've got 3 of you on the airplane.
Oh, okay, I didn't know about the third one. Because the, I want to say the Air Force, the Army, basically commandeered them all. All right, so how big is this thing? To start off with, I'm doing comparisons to the 233 and the ASK-21, which I'm sure most of us are familiar with. And you'll notice wingspans go 51, 56 feet, 83 feet. Okay, that's bigger. Wing area, 219, 190, 850, it's a big. Aspect ratio, not very high, 8.2. I bet none of you have gliders that are that low. In fact, even these out here aren't that low.
I do.
Oh, yeah.
Hang glider.
Oh, well said, and we'll come back to that glide ratio. But look at these gross weights, just over 1,000 pounds, 7,500. In a word, this thing is big. It's not something you're going to put in this hangar and just use for fun. Okay? Look something like this. This does not really give you a good idea of just how big that is. You really have. First time I saw one, I'm like, holy crap, that's big. In the paper, you'll see it's roughly the size of a C-47. Okay? So to give you a little intro, if you're not already familiar, and to remind you if you are, what we were doing with these cargo gliders, this is a little newsreel clip from back in the day.
Some of the biggest kites are large enough to take a bus.
It's small.
The crew was told that huge engine displays on maneuver. Today, there's a special test how best to distribute the maximum weight of 10 and very soon they're hell. And a given signal, the fuel line is passed off, and the glider pilot is left to his own ignition. With remarkable skill, the glider pilot makes a perfect landing. And what's this? Well, would you believe it?
Of course, he made a perfect landing. It's training. It's uncontested.
No tank traps.
Yeah. Okay, so who was building these things? It wasn't Lockheed or Douglas or Boeing because they were busy building the other airplanes that you're familiar with. It was designed by Waco, the Weber Aircraft Company, which strangely is not in Waco, Texas, even though I always think of it that way. I think it was in Ohio. It was intended to be built by many manufacturers. Little side tangent, one of the books I read was Bill Norton's book on compact gliders. It is amazing how many other companies tried to design a glider without success. In America, this was about the only one that actually worked. There were 70,000 parts in this glider. I was just talking with Jeff about this. Tiny little pieces because you're trying to make this very lightweight. Waco themselves built 1,074 of them. Ford, besides building 24s, was the largest manufacturer, 4,190 gliders, and in total 13,990 were built. The Gibson Refrigerator Company, that sounds like an aircraft manufacturer, but they built wooden refrigerators. Apparently they also built caskets and so forth, so they knew how to work with wood. There was also steel in here, welding, so they figured out how to do that. I added this just last night. Jeff was telling me about the TIM aircraft, which was just down here in Van Nuys, they built a respectable number of 434. And there were other companies that were involved, generally ones who were experienced in wood and welded steel. So the limitations, the maximum design speed, 150 miles per hour, calibrated, or for those of you like me who prefer knots, 130. Empty weight, 3,600 pounds. Design gross weight, 7,500, which means a payload just under 2 tons, just under 4,000 pounds. The emergency gross weight was 9,000 pounds. You know, the Army and the Air Force have never overloaded an aircraft. Just all the time. 5,400 pounds of payload. The minimum load, if you wanted to go, the thing was tail heavy, empty. If you decided, okay, we're going to go out and do a training flight, you better grab several of your buddies, because you need 2 pilots up front, and you need either 4 people sitting right behind the pilots, or you need 600 pounds of ballast right behind the pilots in their place, just to get the center of gravity far enough forward. So this is a cockpit. This is down in Lubbock. You see the 2 seats here with the control wheels, which hang from the ceiling. Up here are three knobs for adjusting trim, 3-axis trim. Of course, I'm sure you had to look up there, okay, which way do I go? Because it's just round and round. The tow release is right up here. You'll see some videos sometimes of the dramatic, you know, we're going along and the pilot reaches up and pulls down the tow release for that. Spoilers, the spoiler was a big lever on the outside of your seat. Down here on the floor, in between, was another lever that you pretty much wanted to make sure where it was, because when you pull it back, it released the nose, so the nose would open up. Which, you know, you're in the nose, it goes up. And because it goes up, it's hinged up here. That means all of these controls, all the cables, have to work their way up to the top to come out at the top, because that's where it hinges open. Finally, there's also the parachute release here. We'll talk about that. That was an additional drag device. Okay, the instrument panel looks like this. Airspeed, rate of climb, turn and bank, which was driven by a Venturi. It was vacuum driven by Venturi on the side. Altimeter and a compass. And I had this nice picture of it installed in the airplane, and Doug did me one better. He has one. It's over here on the table. You can see it, which he tells me has all original instruments in it. Cargo, what can I put in this box that's behind where the pilots sit? Well, you can put 13 fully equipped troops. We have a picture here of 12 troops and 1 prisoner from EAA Chapter 1000 many, many years ago. Just to give you an idea, yeah, they don't have all their gear, but you can see how many people that is. And that's 13 guys in the back, okay? That's not counting the 2 pilots up front. The classic CG-4A cargo was the Jeep. And I'm pretty much convinced that Waco designed the aircraft around the Jeep, because when you stuff it into that hole, there's not a lot of gap around it. There was the airborne bulldozer. This thing was about 5,000 pounds. If you go back a couple of slides, what I said, you put one of those in the Waco CG-4A and 2 pilots, and you are at the emergency maximum gross weight. It's been noted that pilots did not like flying those because it was so heavy, you know, of course, thus very sluggish and so forth. Other things, I don't have pictures here, but there's more details in the article. 75 millimeter howitzer, 37 millimeter anti-tank gun, the quarter-ton trailer that goes with the Jeep. Those were all things that could go in. There is a wonderful video on YouTube, I'll tell you how to get to it later, of essentially how to load a CG-4A. And it shows, it's a training film. It shows troops putting in a Jeep, not the dozer, but the Jeep, the trailer, and 75 millimeter howitzer at least are in there. And yeah, the Baker Bolin was a knot that I was not familiar with, but that comes up very important in doing that. It's a cool knot. Okay, raising the nose. I said the nose comes up, is hinged right here. You can see a little Jeep in there. And this is at the Silent Wings Museum in Lubbock. And you will note that they have put this on display, having run into a tree or pole or whatever, because that's kind of the way you landed these things, was you landed and ran into things because there were things to run into. This is one of the coolest design ideas, I think, for this. On top of the nose, there's this tripod, which, as the guy who teaches pedostatics at test pilot school, I, of course, immediately noticed that that's where the pedostatic tube is, which, strangely enough, is the exact same pedostatic tube as on my airplane. But its real purpose was to help open the nose. You put a cable attached to that that came down into the fuselage. Back over here, there was a sliding piece of metal on a tube that essentially was a brake that was attached to it. It went over a pulley, down to another pulley, came up here, and had a hook that you attached to the pintle hook of the Jeep. And why would you do that? It's not to keep the Jeep there, to get the nose out of the way. Because if you can imagine in some high-tech animation here, you want to get out, you release the nose, you fire up the Jeep, and you start driving forward, and it pulls the nose up.
With the pilots in it?
Generally, the pilots have gotten out of the way by now. There is the problem if the Jeep is not tied down well when you crash land, that, well, it might do the same thing again. When you get to about here, there's another cable that's connected to the release on this thing that releases it from the Jeep. The lock over here holds the nose open, and you just drive right on out.
On that, there was a case in Burma, a big back of Burma. They were carrying tractors and bulldozers.
Yeah.
Somebody did an area truck and the whole cycle happened with the crew in the nose. The nose came back down and latched, and the tractor was sitting on the ground in front of them.
Oh, it just popped out.
It popped down, it was there, and the nose closed, and everyone was fine.
That's hilarious. But if you look at that nose and its structure, it's not real crash-worthy. So one of the modifications that was made, this again in Lubbock, is the so-called Griswold nose, because Griswold was the company that made it. And basically they added a lot more steel out here in front to provide resistance for head-on collision. They also moved the tow hook from up here down to here, which supposedly didn't create so much nose-down pitching moment. The ailerons, this thing is huge. These are not powered controls. They're fully reversible with one pilot doing this. As a result, the ailerons, they're freeze ailerons, got the pivots down low, so you get some adverse yaw reduction. This rod here goes to a servo tab that deflects the opposite direction, that helps reduce your yoke forces from that. In here, this little bit right here, that's the trim tab for the ailerons. Landing gear. The glider came shipped with two types of landing gear. One was so-called training gear, which was this tripod that bolted onto the side, and it had brakes And when you're in training, you come in, land, brake to a stop, hook it up, go again, so forth. The original idea for tactical, for in the war zone, was instead of this rod with 2 wheels on it, you would take off. After you got up to a little bit of height, you'd jettison the wheels, reduce the drag on a grip.
Yeah.
And then these skids are what you would land on. They found out that, you can probably see this yourself. If I land on skids, I'm just sliding across the ground. I don't really have any directional stability. So I could easily end up just sliding sideways on those skids. They found that the directional control when landing was actually better. So, you could try to avoid hitting that other glider if you had wheels on it still. So in the end, when they were actually used, most of the gliders still had the training wheel.
But the extra drag must have been horrible, right?
Almost imperceptible. Here's the Waco CG-4A. This is at National Museum of the Air Force, hanging up over a C-47 here with the wheels on it. Okay, here's one that many of you will be interested in. How do you move one of these things? If we want to move your glider, assuming you have one, we take it apart, we put it in a trailer, and you drive it away. Simple. This thing was shipped in 5 crates, as shown here in pictures from one of the documents that I came across of how this was packaged. The glider itself, its empty weight, 3,600 pounds. The shipping material was almost 17,000 pounds. I'm not going to do the math, but that's like 4 or 5 times more weight in shipping material than actual glider. And of course, as the war economy goes, we're building these things like mad and pushing them out, and they're getting built faster and they're getting shipped, so they're a bunch just sitting around. Victory, we're done, yay. What do we do with all these? Auction them off. The story goes that most people who bid on these and bought these gliders had no interest in the gliders. They wanted 17,000 pounds of high quality lumber. And Jeff has told me stories about using the boxes to make, like sheds, buildings. Some people made a house out of it. Some people took, part of the glider and modified it a little so that became, your hunting shed or whatnot. But, and in the article, I give you an idea of how these boxes compare in size to shipping containers that you see on the railroads over here. Help you get an idea of how big it is. How do I get this thing in the air? Well, here we use the mighty Pawnee, which has 235 horsepower at sea level. Not sea level. For the CG-4A, typically a C-47. There were other airplanes that were used as tugs, but the C-47 was the most common, to the fact that in all of the manuals, when it shows a tow plane, it's a silhouette of a C-47, which is 2 times 1,200 horsepower for that. The tow rope. The tow ropes that we use here are 5/16 polypropylene, roughly 200 feet until I keep putting new ends on them and they get shorter. The tensile strength, okay, quiz time. What's the required tensile strength on a tow rope?
What it says in the manual.
Okay, what does the FAA say?
80% to 2,000,
Yeah.
twice that gross.
80% to 200. You said 2,000.
Well, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, okay. With that in mind, these ropes have a tensile strength 2050, which is just under 200% of a 233 gross weight. Okay, great. CG-4A, this rope here is 11/16 nylon. That's one of the places we use that nylon. which was a strategic material, and they came in 350-foot lengths. And if you were going to use it for a dual tow, then you had a 75-foot length that you added to it to make one of them longer than the other. Tensile strength, 12,000 pounds, which puts it at about 160% of the Waco CG-4A normal gross weight. So these all fit in the rules that we just said. How do you attach it? I am told by people who should know that the tow hook was not a modification to the C-47. It was an installation, which meant that this cone back here, you just took that off and you stuck this in and you bolted it onto the structure that was already there. And if you didn't need it anymore, you just unbolted it and took it out. Where's the tow hook? Where do we pull from? The 233 we pull from underneath. Any of you who've been on the tail as the tow pilot went a little too fast. Fully understand that. The CG-4A, it's actually up on the top, which gives you a nose down pitch. Takeoff. Turns out the takeoff is just like you're used to. We start out, we're both on the ground, start the takeoff. You can see that they even drew it into the manual here that you may end up down on the nose skids for a while until you get enough elevator authority. Then the glider takes off first. The plane's still on the ground. Then the tow plane takes off. And then you climb out. We would normally be about here in the high tow position, level with the tow plane. For reasons that I have not been able to find yet, the CG-4A flew higher on the high tow. In fact, your side picture was to put the top of the vertical fin on the astrodome at the front of the C-47, which meant your picture looked something like that. You're looking down on the tow plane. Where are your limits? What's the size of the box? Turns out this is 20 degrees either side, 25 up, 20 down. This is bigger than the box that we teach here. So it's actually fairly, I can't think of it, it's fairly large. Okay? But a C-47 has enough power, especially if it's not carrying anything inside of it, to tow two of these things at the same time. Don't even think about it. But as I said, you got one line at 75 feet longer. That typically went on the right side. You have two gliders here, and now your position was that you moved laterally until you were lined up with the wingtip on your side, and you're both still at about the same height. Crosswind takeoff, again, just like you're used to. You start out, glider comes up, crabs into the wind to stay over the runway. Then the tow plane lifts off. It's crabbing as well. And once you're past all the obstacles, you line up behind it and just crab the whole formation. Airborne pickup. This goes to that myth that I said about, oh, you're going to have gliders, we'll go back and reuse them. Several, I don't know this number, hundreds of gliders flew into Normandy for the invasion. And after, the front line had moved away, someone decided, there's a lot of useful stuff there. Let's go recover whatever we can. They sent out a group to look for gliders that were still usable. Hundreds went in. Take a guess at how many were still serviceable.
5. 0.
Wow, y'all are guessing low. 13. 13 old gliders. But the point is, and Doug mentioned Burma, where it was being used in sometimes like a trailer, so it was uncontested. Yeah, they would do this and be able to recover.
Did they give the pilot a Medal of Honor for a reusable glider after one land?
No. In fact, not part of this presentation, but glider pilots typically tended to be the guys who couldn't make it in regular pilot training, which is kind of sad, but that they went that way. But anyway, so this C-47 flies over with the hook hanging out, grabs a loop, and starts yanking you into the air. The acceleration was reported longitudinally 0.7 G. If you've ever done a Navy cat shot off a carrier, which you probably haven't, I actually did one once, that's 2.5 Gs. So 0.7 Gs, if you want to imagine that, go lean on your stairway or get a chair that's leaned back about 45 degrees. That's what it feels like. It's not really a lot. There is an absolutely wonderful YouTube video available out there that details this whole thing from how it was set up and how it was flown and so forth. And the best part was that the video was narrated by a relatively unknown captain by the name of Ronald Reagan. So this wasn't just a hard, hook on the airplane. You needed to give some relief to that. The system, which is detailed in this video, was called the Model 80. They couldn't come up with a better name. If it was today, it'd have some cool acronym that spoke to what it did and so forth. But no, every source I've seen, Model 80. 1,057 feet of cable, had multiple disc brakes on it, and what would happen is it would be set up so that when the hook grabbed the line, it would start letting out cable, and it would slowly pull the brakes in and to accelerate the glider. You usually ended up with about 600 feet of line out. That's a long tow rope. The initial tow plane speed as they're coming in to grab that, 130 to 140 miles per hour. As they snatch it, full power, full climb power, go, this thing starts feeding out, the glider comes. When you're done and stable, you've slowed down to 105, even though you added all that power. So there's a lot of inertia going on. Glider couldn't be any more than 8,000 pounds, but generally if you're taking it out, well, you might have some wounded or something in there, but it's not going to be excessively heavy. And that's below the normal gross weight anyway. On aero tow, sometimes on the tow rope, there was a comm cord wrapped around it that plugged into the C-47 and to the CG-4A. And so now you were connected to the intercom with the tow pilot, which is really cool because that way you didn't have to, use a radio, you didn't have to interfere with everyone else, and the bad guys didn't hear what you were talking about. How do you typically tow? Here, we tow up to a particular altitude or to where the lift is and we get off. CG-4A, I say it's basically a pattern tow. But it's a pattern tow with a long drive. So imagine if you could, without the mountains here, taking off here, going to 1,000 AGL and flying to Sacramento or something. Maneuvering on tow, this is interesting. It says use aileron rather than rudder to hold your position. The more and more I've thought about this, it's not explicitly called out, but I'm thinking this is talking about the double tow. That to stay to your side, they're saying just to bank outward. Because that way you can get to a zero control force instead of mashing on the rudder all the time. Practice flying with your feet off the rudder pedals while on the tow. It allows you to relax. Yeah, you're going to places that's going to shoot you. That should all work. Stall characteristics is straight out of the book. The first warning of approaching stall is loss of aileron control. So your ailerons start getting mushy. It's a straight plane, so it starts stalling out of the tips. And so forth. Has little tendency to drop either way, mushes considerably before being stalled, and you can control with the rudder for that. It does have an interesting warning. Be cautious about using a slipping turn during emergency gross weight conditions. Any idea why?
Running out of rudder.
Yeah, you're already at a slow speed, very close to stall. And now, so if you're in a slip and you do stall, you're going into an incipient spin, and you do not have altitude to recover. Okay, glide performance for our gliders, reasonably good. The CG-4A, I think, slightly better than the Space Shuttle or a rock. Actually, it's not quite that bad. In fact, I was thinking about it. Jeff's Bonanza sitting right over here in idle power or power off. It's about the same glide ratio. And we're going to see actual numbers of this. There's a comment in one of the manuals. The CG-4A was not designed as a sailplane. It is simply a cargo-carrying airplane without engines. And there's no, well, I would say there's no soaring. Rumor has it that in training, some guys actually did gain altitude. Yeah.
Some years back, we had in attendance at least two of the old timers who had been instructors at 29 Hop.
Oh, yeah?
And they told us that a flight where they were done doing what they had to do, and it was a gloomy day. And they were up for 3 or 4 hours. And I think they came back before the search light came out.
I'm guessing they were pretty lightweight.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
By the
Okay.
way, the pilot who did soar at CG-4, that was Dick Johnson.
Okay.
He knows a few things about soaring.
There's a story of one of the early national soaring champion. He was flying from somewhere to somewhere, and he was flying to Dayton, Ohio. I think he was flying out of Dayton, Ohio to somewhere else. The tow line, he had 10 troops on board. Tow rope broke, and he actually soared the rest of the way to Dayton. Talk about getting airsick in the back. So there was a number of.
Yeah. But still, in general, it's not going to work as well as your glider. All right, speed to fly. We're used to talking about LRD max or best glide and min sync. For the CG-4A, the book talks about normal glide speed, which essentially comes out to be your LRD max. But that's not your approach speed yet. There is no advantage in flying the maximum distance over the ground, especially when you just released right over your target landing spot. The glide speed used standard is the tactical glide, which we're going to see turns out to be right around mid-sync. Not because they were interested in staying up long, people shooting at you, you don't want to be up there. That's just kind of where it hit, because they wanted something between best glide and stall. And notice this reading here. You're on approach. To steepen your glide path, raise the nose. To flatten the glide path, lower the nose. Wow, that's backwards from what you're used to. Okay, here's the first of those charts I promised you. So here's the 233 and min-sync LRD max we're used to. Here's the normal glide speed for the CG-4A. If you're trying to see, that's about 12 for max. Here's the tactical glide speed over here. And actually, this comes up a little later. As far as your glide ratio, Cessna 180 manual tells you wind billing, it'll glide right there. Some tests I did on a Cessna 150, right about there. It's right in there with typical G8 airplanes. Okay, here's the your drag polar sync rate and so forth. And yeah, tactical glide speed's right up here at about the top. And you'll notice it's coming down a lot faster than your 233. The airfoil. I used to think this was a way funky airfoil. By that number, it's designed with a lift coefficient of 0.6. Most airfoils are like 0.4, 0.2 or less for their least drag. And you'll notice it's got kind of this wonky shape. But it turns out that the 43012A, which just kind of flattened this part out down here and adjusted this to keep the same center line, what you got on the 233. And a lot of other,
What's your standard airfoil?
yeah, a lot of other airplane or gliders, because it works really good for gliders because we fly at low speed at high lift coefficients. Okay, and yeah, the camber keeps the required angle of attack lower, the droop leading edge acts kind of like a leading edge flap for keeping the flow attack. Landing speeds. In say a 233, if you need to go down more, well, you can pull the spoilers out, but you can also push the nose down, which is normal piloting. Even though we teach backside techniques, you know, flight path here, airspeed here. No, the CG-4A, you can see here, if I speed up, I get a better glide ratio. If I slow down, I get a worse one. It's a different way of thinking. But then again, glider pilots who probably haven't flown anything else, this is what they're taught. So that's all they know. Landing speeds, we typically come in, you know, pretty fast. By comparison, so we have extra energy to deal with wind shear or any other unforeseen circumstances. Like I said, we teach the backside technique. The CG-4A is a backside flight. And remember, when you land, you're probably going to run into something. Either another glider, a hedgerow, a pole that the Germans have kindly left there for you to run into. There's not a lot of room. So what do we say? Crash into the softest thing you can find as slow as possible. So you want to be coming in slow. Oh, this picture is out of the CG-4A manual, and there's your landing point. It always struck me, it's not very far until you run into that house. Flight path control, there were spoilers on the top. In the paper, there's some analysis of how effective they are. Nowhere near as effective as you're used to. But when you're already flying at a L/D of 12 and the spoilers take you down to 10, you know, you don't need to lose that much L/D. Slips work, big boxy fuselage, and there was a tail parachute. Obviously, one-time use. You're coming in, you decide, oh, I'm too high, you deploy the parachute, gives you lots of drag. That analysis also in the article. You start going down, and when you get scared, you pull the other thing that releases the chute, and then you're done with it. If you planned it appropriately, you may not use the chute at all. Landing patterns, these are all shown in the book. You notice they all, no straight ins, they all have a turn. Why? Because with turns, we can adjust our flight path. If we're too high, you know, we turn late. If we're too low, we turn early, sort of thing. The normal landing field, for us, nice prepared surface, minimal obstacles, it's day VFR, life is wonderful. These guys, unprepared fields, short fields with hedgerows, and when I say short, we're talking less than 1,000 feet. Rommel's asparagus, yeah, the Germans were no dummies. They looked around and go, you know, if these guys have gliders, this would make a great landing field for them. So they basically go out and erect a bunch of telephone poles, which was called Rommel's asparagus, for you to run into. Oh, of course, there are people shooting at you, and unless you're the first dog in, there's a bunch of gliders in the way already taking all the prime spots. And, oh, yeah, you might be doing this at night. The normal landing outcome for us, we're code 1, ready to go again. Hook it up and let's go. For CG-4A, as we already kind of mentioned, yeah, it's a crash. You're going to be Class A. And it didn't help that the guys you just carried into the war zone, they got out and figured, you know, this is expendable. No one's going to use it. They start cutting off, you know, pieces of fabric or taking parts away for souvenirs. All right, so how do you train for this? We mentioned the TG2s, that we have several here on the field. Originally, the Army commandeered all of those and thought, we'll use these train glider pilots. You might also be realizing that even a TG-2 glides way too good to model this. I already said they fly kind of like a GA airplane, you know, at idle or no engine. Well, someone got the idea, they started converting a Taylorcraft L2 such as this, which actually was converted back. You know, take one of those and you make one of those. You take the engine off, you put another seat up front to take care of the weight and balance. So now you have 3 seats. So you have the student, the instructor, and another student observing. And you can do that with an Aranca L3 or a Piper Cub. The first prototype was developed in 9 days. Wow, that's pretty amazing. So I think it was Jeff here told me, yeah, the reason that happened was that the manufacturers were pumping out all these airframes and they were all sitting out there waiting for engines. Well, if you got an airframe already, you can just go out there, grab one, log some stuff on the front, doesn't take long. And the glide profile was much better match with it. I think this picture I took at Peanut Air Museum. Let's see. Yeah, we got just a couple minutes here. This is just funny to me. Out of the training manual, these are common errors in attitude, lack of military discipline, disliking flying, not asking pertinent questions, asking unnecessary questions. You know, oh, yeah, oh, out of control. Polishing the apple, basically sucking up to your instructor. Errors in technique, in judgment, slow understanding, poor attention. Yeah, basically nothing's changed. Okay, so we'll finish up with, Russ, this is great stuff. I want to go see one. Where can I do that? One of the best places, the Silent Wings Museum in Lubbock, Texas. It's the old terminal for the commercial airport. There's, of course, another terminal now, but this whole place is full of stuff. That's where this glider is. This glider was actually retrieved from sitting on top of a tire store painted as a big sign. And there's a video of them taking it off the top of the store to bring back. It was god-awful in its look. Of course, the National Museum of the Air Force in Dayton, they have one. Theirs was built by the Gibson Refrigerator Company. Some other museums have replicas. There may be a few other actual ones. I know one museum, I think up in Michigan or something, has one side all open so you can see what's inside. Apparently the National Air and Space Museum had one, but they weren't interested, so they sent it off to the Air Force Museum. So why don't I go down to Edwards and see a bunch of cargo gliders, you know, being tested and developed and all that other stuff? Well, remember what the roles were. One, the trailer. We built better cargo planes. You know, the C-54, the DC-4, which didn't really reach its stride until the Berlin airlift, first flew in 42, was in development. That was bigger. And of course, now we've got things all the way up to C-17s and C-5s and so forth. So we found better ways to move stuff around. Well, what about the airborne assault, putting stuff into small areas? We have parachutes now. We can fly a C-130 over and just dump it out. It goes down a lot easier to do. And we have helicopters. I have a picture of a later model Huey here. Remember the Waco could carry 13 troops? This will carry 13 troops. You could strap a Jeep below it. Basically, this thing can deliver the same amount as a CG-4A, put it down, and then as a bonus, take off and go back and do it again.
You can use it again.
Yeah.
Not destroy it.
Exactly. So I've been promising you that there's more stuff out there. If you go, take a picture of this slide. Go to erbman.org, that's my website. Click on the link that says Trailing Edge Blog, and then look down that page for what was it like to fly cargo gliders, and open it up. It's a PDF. It's like 96 pages long, and at the very back in the references, there are links for all those YouTube videos and other stuff. Also, in the same area of the website, all these manuals, I managed to find PDF versions of them, and they're all posted there, so you can download them and do your own forensic flight test with it. Finally, just a little plug for EAA1000.org. EAA Chapter 1000 lasted from 1991 to 2021, 30 years. And this is I was newsletter editor for 25 of those. And this is a repository of all the stuff that we ever published and did. And if you search through them, you can find stuff written by guys like Bill Erb and Murray Rosansky. And there's even a report of when we had a cookout and a glider tour with Jeff right over here. Okay? And that completes my part. Jeff tells me he has an addendum, which I'll get to right after I talk to you.
Promised a YouTube link.
It's in this document. Because I could put something up here, that had a weird list of characters. You wouldn't remember that. But if you can remember these 3 steps, you'll get to it. That's right.
I had seen something on some aviation internet forum that there was talk about trying to finally fly one of the restored ones. Is there any truth to that, or is that preposterous?
I've heard of that in like up in Michigan. I've heard of this guy talking about trying to do that. If you've been listening to all that, about crashing stuff, it'd be kind of scary for me. I don't think it's, and I believe he said it would be easier to restore an